Hey guys, Professor Dalton here. Today we're going to move into our second unit of managerial accounting, and we're going to look at job order costing. Now, job order costing is going to be useful when we are building mostly large items. This is going to be used in companies that are manufacturing products maybe that are made to order, and the unique nature of each job requires that each job really kind of be constructed in its own thing. And when we look at managerial accounting, we're going to look at basically two types of processes to create our goods and services. We're going to have job order costing, which is what we're doing here, which is useful for large single item types of things. Things like airplanes or a stadium that we see on screen. These are not manufactured using process-based. That is to say that these are not coming down an assembly line with workers attaching parts to them. Boeing doesn't have a giant assembly line that an airplane comes down, right? And workers go to the plane and just stick whatever it is that they're in charge of sticking onto it and it goes down the assembly line. That's not how airplanes are made, right? Airplanes are made in a big hangar, I imagine, and people go to the plane and construct it. And likely that's all they're really responsible for within that one hangar, right? Within that one building. So job order costing is useful when we have one item that's being typically custom manufactured for a client. So when a manufacturing facility begins work on a item, they are able to pull in direct costs and direct labor, and we can apply it directly to these jobs. In the example we have up now, we have 3 jobs. Direct materials and direct labor are charged to the job as the job is worked. As we apply direct materials to job 1, we are going to add the cost of those materials to the cost of job 1. When we add direct labor to job 1, we're adding the cost of that direct labor onto job 1. We're going to do the same thing with job 2. We're going to do the same thing with job 3. But again, these are my direct costs. I can directly trace these costs to these items, whatever they may be. But remember our third component of costing my items. Direct materials, direct labor, I can charge, I can look at, I can trace, right, directly to the item. But what about manufacturing overhead? You guys remember that one, right? Manufacturing overhead is those things that I can't really say exactly how much goes into this one item, as opposed to maybe all the items that I make, but I know that it gets something. Let's say my business is making these giant jumbo jets for Boeing or whoever. I've got seats, right? I have the cockpit area of an airplane. Bad example, I don't know anything about airplanes. But I've got those big giant wheels, right? And I can point at an airplane, and I can say that airplane has X number of wheels, X number of seats. What about, let me think. What about the glue? I'm sure an airplane has some glue in it. We have to glue down the carpet. We have to adhere all the stuff to the sides of the plane. And there's glue in an airplane, right? Surely there is. How do I tell you exactly how much glue goes into an airplane? I really can't, right? It's not even possible. So what I'm going to call glue, I'm going to call an overhead. It's an indirect cost. It's a cost that I can't say exactly how much went to these different planes or maybe a specific plane. But I do know one thing. I know how much I spent in glue as a total, right? I know how much, let's just keep it simple. I know how much a worker can apply glue, if that is his job, let's say per hour. What I'm getting at is I can figure out an estimate of the cost of glue that goes into this airplane. Even though I don't know exactly how much went into it, I can estimate. But that's the important part here, is that allocating manufacturing overhead, it gets allocated based on an estimate. It doesn't get allocated based on an actual cost. The reason for this, of course, is we want timely information. We want to know how much this plane is going to cost before we're done building it. I can tell you direct materials because I know exactly how many seats need to go into it. I can tell you direct labor because I know how long it should take to make a plane. I've probably done it a time or two, even though you wouldn't guess. Manufacturing overhead, I can guess, right? How much it's going to cost, but I'm not entirely positive until it's all done and I get the bill for it. A lot of times when we're looking at manufacturing overhead, let's think of something like power for the building. I don't know what my power bill is going to be until I get the bill, and I'm not going to get the bill until the end of the period. So what I need to do is I need to estimate what that bill is going to be, and I need to apply a portion of that bill onto this job that I am currently creating, I'm currently producing. And anytime we start a job under a job order costing type of process, we're going to start with a job cost sheet. In this example, we've got a chair company. They make wooden chairs. Works for me. I've got a job cost sheet for Chairco. The job number is listed B-22-58, and this is going to allow me to track all costs that get applied to this job. There's some other information on this slide too, like the department number, which again we can use to track to this department and see the costs that go to this department. We can see the item that I'm wanting to build is a wooden chair. I've got a date initiated of 8/9/19 and date completed, unit completed. Obviously they're not completed yet, so I'm going to wait to fill that out later. And by the way, in this example, we are actually creating 4 wooden chairs. Our example here builds 4 chairs. So let's look at some direct materials being applied to this job. What we will have is a requisition form, a materials requisition form. This is a piece of paper that allows us to track costs. And again, keep that in mind. Everything we do as an accountant is going to be cued by a source document. This is our source document here, a materials requisition form. Requisition form for different types of lumber. I've got the form has its own number, F2-48-68. And again, by the way, these are numbers that I just made up. They don't really mean anything. But you can see the job number listed, B-22-58. Going to Department 2. This is telling me that in this requisition form, I'm asking for 8 feet of 2x4s, 8 feet of 2x2s. I want 12 2x4s, 10 2x2s, the cost of $5 each for the 2x4s, $4 each for the 2x2s, gives me a total of $100 for direct materials. Pairing this with the job costing sheet, right? I can look at this requisition form was created. It was approved by Steve Martin, which would be awesome, right? To work for Steve Martin. But my requisition form tells my job what costs have been applied to it. I can see this requisition, F2-48-68, was created in order to serve job B-22-58, and these materials are going to Department 2. We'll then take these numbers and these reference numbers and we'll apply it to our job cost sheet. We can now see that this job number, B-22-58, has asked for $100 worth of direct materials, and we can refer to requisition number F2-48-68 to see exactly what was ordered and, importantly, by who. If there's ever a question as to why we're building these 4 wooden chairs, we can always go say, hey, Steve Martin, why did you authorize the use of this wood to build these chairs? Hopefully he'll have a good excuse, right? All right, so I've got my direct materials in. The next step is to look at direct labor. I can always refer to a direct labor cost timesheet, my employee time card, to see what costs need to be applied to this job. I've got an employee time card, ticket number 42. My employee's name is Earl, and he's at the main location again on 8/9/19. I can see that he started his day at 8 a.m. He ended his day at 4 p.m. He worked a full 8 hours at a rate of $15 an hour for a total of $120. And I can see again on the time card what job my employee worked for how many hours. If Earl had worked on another job, I would have an additional line for start and end time and the number of hours, the rate, and the amount that should be charged to that job. But as I have it right here, Earl has worked on this one job all day, 8 hours, and his supervisor is Chevy Chase. Sounds like a really fun chair company, right? But again, this is information that we can use not only to bring over to our timesheet, but also to trace the cost back to Chevy Chase. We've got, again, on our job cost sheet, I can see that I have added, I've got my direct materials, again, requisition number and amount. I've now added my direct labor, ticket number 42, for 8 hours at a total amount of $120. And again, if there's ever any question about this, we can look up ticket number 42, figure out that that was Earl, figure out who his supervisor is, and figure out why Chevy Chase and Steve Martin now seemingly are getting together to build 4 chairs. Kind of a weird company, but let's see where this goes. My next step, though, is going to be determine how much manufacturing overhead to apply to these jobs. As we can see, I have a requisition number and an amount, and I can tell you exactly how much wood has gone into this job number B-22-58. I can tell you exactly how much labor has gone into this job. I can look at ticket number 42. I can tell you who worked the job, how long he worked for, and the amount that needs to be charged to this job. Again, these 4 wooden chairs. My next step, though, is to determine manufacturing overhead. How much overhead, how much cost worth of overhead needs to be applied to this job. We got to talk about manufacturing overhead for a little bit because we haven't really we haven't really talked about it too much, have we? We haven't talked about how to get that number. The key here is that, again, we cannot trace manufacturing overhead directly to these items. If we could, we would. If we could tell you exactly how much glue is in each airplane, sure, we would charge exactly that amount and no more, no less. But because we want our information ahead of time, we don't know what the bill is going to be. We don't know how much glue is going to get used. So we need to come up with a way to allocate these indirect overhead costs because we can't directly trace them to the job. We need an allocation base. We need something that ties the usage of overhead to production. And whatever this thing is that we tie the use of overhead to needs to drive the cost. And what this means is it needs to be related to the cost. And typically, as you see, we'll use labor hours or machine hours. And the way this makes sense is, think about this. My employee, Earl, he is in charge of putting together, well, we're making 4 wooden chairs. So Earl is in charge of taking these pieces of lumber. He's got these big, long pieces of lumber, and he has to use probably a saw of some type. Let's hope that it's like a gas-powered chainsaw maybe, because gosh, if he's sitting there doing that, that's going to take a while. So he's using let's say it's a gas-powered chainsaw to cut these 2x4s and 2x2s into the correct lengths, all right? I can't tell you exactly how much gas Earl used in his chainsaw, but I can tell you how many hours Earl worked, and then how likely it is that he used X amount of dollars during his time working. Does that make sense? I have employees. They're working. They're doing stuff. Fingers crossed, they're applying direct and indirect materials to this job. How about this? Does Earl, when he's not working, put glue on an airplane? Does Earl, when he's not working, use gas in this chainsaw? No, he doesn't do these things when he's not working. The reason and think about it this way, the reason we incurred the cost of a chainsaw running to cut this lumber is because Earl worked. Does that make sense? When we allocate our total manufacturing costs, we're going to allocate the total cost divided by the total allocation base. So what we're saying here is that when we apply manufacturing overhead costs, we're going to apply it based on a predetermined overhead rate Now, again, just kind of park this in the back of your mind. Predetermined, that means that it's ahead of time, right? We don't know what the actual cost is going to be. We're going to determine it ahead of time. Again, the reason we want to know what my costs are before the end of the period. I want to know how much this airplane cost me before I sell it, right? It's a good idea. So my predetermined overhead rate is going to allow me to allocate manufacturing overhead costs without even having a bill first. I'm going to come up with this predetermined overhead rate that helps me allocate manufacturing overhead costs. But again, remember, it is based on an estimate. So my predetermined overhead rate is going to be the estimated total cost of manufacturing overhead for the next period. Again, remember, we're doing this for the future. So I'm going to estimate the total cost of, let's just say, gasoline for the next month. I'm then going to take the estimated total units of the allocation base for the next period. Again, this should be what drives the cost. My employees' hours. If I expect my employees to work a certain number of hours, I expect to pay a certain amount in, let's say, gasoline, I can come up with a rate of gasoline usage per hour. And I'm not saying Earl is using the chainsaw for the full 8 hours. I'm not saying that he saws a log into a chair shape. What I'm saying is he's doing all the things that are required to put a chair together. It's probably going to use some glue. It's probably going to use maybe some nails. It might use the gas for the chainsaw. I'm going to put all these costs together. And I'm going to put all the hours of all my workers together. And I'm going to divide all my manufacturing overhead costs by all the hours that I expect my employees to work. Does that make sense? I'm going to anticipate all of my manufacturing overhead costs. I'm going to anticipate all of my workers' hours. And I'm going to divide the cost by the number of hours so that I can determine a rate per hour to charge in manufacturing overhead. And again, that rate per hour is going to be based on labor hours. So we're going to base this on labor hours. We've got a cost mix formula. Whoa, look at this guy. Do you guys remember this? Remember last week when I told you would see this formula again? You're seeing it again. This is our cost mix formula. Y is the estimated total manufacturing costs. Now, we did this a little bit differently, right, the other day? We looked at just cost in general. We weren't applying it to a manufacturing system. Now, one thing to keep in mind, our manufacturing overhead consists of, let's say, a lot of different types of costs, both fixed cost and variable costs. If you'll remember, fixed costs are fixed. As long as we're within our relevant range, those fixed costs should not change. So we'll have fixed costs that are, let's say, warehouse rent, right? A lot of different products get produced in a warehouse, but we have one bill for rent. How do I allocate that one bill for rent across all of my products and the creation of those products? Let's take that a step further and go back to the glue example. Glue is applied to the airplane or the chairs, whatever example you want to take, at a rate that we can predetermine, right? We can guess this ahead of time. We can think about this ahead of time. So kind of my point here is my total estimated manufacturing overhead costs, Y, equals a fixed portion, which we could say is rent or something like that, plus my predetermined overhead rate, B, times the estimated level of allocation base of the activity. That is to say, again, the hours of the people that will be working. So basically what I'm saying here is my cost mix formula, the same thing that we saw before, can help me determine my total manufacturing overhead costs. Let's say in this example, I've got Chairco. They estimate a 150,000 hours worth of direct labor to meet the coming period's estimated production level. This is to say that I have, maybe based on historical data, I have decided that I'm going to need 150,000 worth of direct labor hours to complete the amount of products that I want to complete during this period. In addition to these 150,000 direct labor hours, the company estimates total manufacturing overhead at 250,000. Again, that's fixed manufacturing overhead for 250, and I've got variable costs of $3 per direct labor hour. So again, this is what I've decided up front, right? So this company's total overhead costs are made up of the 250,000 that is my fixed overhead, plus $3 per direct labor hour. And I've already told you that I expect to need 150,000 direct labor hours in the coming period. I can then determine that my total overhead is going to be $700,000. Y equals 700,000, right? So my predetermined overhead rate, that is to say the amount that I'm going to charge this job in overhead, it's going to be based on the amount of hours an employee works on this job. And I'm going to allocate the cost based on the number of hours an employee works on that job at a rate of $4.67 per hour. The job isn't done yet. The chairs aren't sold. I don't even have a bill for rent yet, all right? But I can tell you this. I can tell you that this job, B-22-58, that I entered into to make these 4 chairs, I started on 8-9. I finished them the same day. Department 2 made some wooden chairs. And I can see the total cost of direct materials. I can look at requisition F2-48-68 to see who requested these materials for $100. My direct labor, I can look at ticket 42 and I can see that Earl spent 8 hours at a total cost of $120. And I'm going to take that same $8 per hour that Earl worked and apply overhead to this job based on that 8 hours at a rate of $4.67 per hour, giving me a total of $37.36. So again, recognize what we've done here. We have estimated our cost of overhead. We have divided that cost across the total amount of employee working hours I anticipate on using this month. When Earl works his 8 hours, Earl is also using $4.67 per hour he works, or $37.36 worth of manufacturing overhead. So now I can see a complete cost of this job. Direct materials cost me $100. Direct labor cost $120. I applied $37.36 in manufacturing overhead for total costs of $257.36. When I divide that by 4, I can get a per unit product cost of $64.34. I don't have a rent bill yet. I don't know exactly how much power, how much glue, how much gasoline I'm going to use this month, but I've got a really good idea, right? And I've got a really good idea of how many hours my employees are going to work this month. I can figure out per employee hour how much I'm going to have to spend in manufacturing overhead, and without even getting any bills or doing any real work on anything. And I can tell you with a relative degree of certainty, right, what my cost of these 4 wooden chairs is going to be. But also keep in mind, this is not perfectly accurate. I am basing this cost, this $4.67 per hour, on an estimate. How many times do you think that estimate is going to be right? Not very often at all, especially in an accounting classroom, because these problems are made to not work out. So what we'll see in a couple of lessons is how to fix this problem, right? Very likely, my manufacturing overhead costs came in at above or below $4.67. It may be higher, it may be lower. I don't know until I get the bill. When I get the bill, spoiler alert, I got to go back and fix this, right? Because accounting is nothing if it's not precise. So when I get the bill for, let's say, gasoline, I'm going to go back and I'm going to recognize that the cost of manufacturing these items is less or more than what I have allocated. Gas might have ended up costing me, just keep it simple and say gas. Gas might have ended up costing me $5 per hour. It might have cost me $4.50 per hour. I don't know, right? As of this moment, this is 8/9. Let's say the gas bill doesn't come in until 8/30, right? I don't know what my real bill is going to be. I can estimate what it's going to be, but I can guarantee you that is not going to be accurate. We're going to have to fix misapplied overhead. We'll either under or over apply overhead, and we'll have to fix it later. But we'll see that at another point. All right, so next time I'm with you guys, we're going to look at just the general flow of inventory. And really, this is just looking at the fact that all of these things that we produce come from an asset, right? When we buy lumber, we give somebody cash. We're exchanging an asset for an asset. All of these things that we're manufacturing are assets. And also, as promised, we'll look at my misapplied overhead and how to fix the misapplication of overhead.